The Crixian hegemony had come to Earth with the arrogance of a race that had conquered 17 star systems, leaving a trail of ashes and trembling empires behind them. Their dreadnought-class warships emerged from the edges of the Sol system like celestial giants, their immense plasma lances crackling with barely contained energy. Earth, with its sprawling cities, peaceful inhabitants, and underdeveloped military defenses, was an easy target. The Crixians, with their near-invincible energy shields and devastating firepower, had arrived to claim the planet. At first, Earth's response was a quiet, uneasy submission. The Galactic Council had long warned of the Crixian menace, but Earth's pleas for defense were dismissed as alarmist rhetoric from a species too inexperienced to understand the art of war. But the attack on the Yangtze Dawn, a civilian convoy carrying thousands of colonists, shattered any hope for peaceful diplomacy. The Crixian ships had blasted it apart without a second thought, leaving nothing but debris, and the final cries of the crew echoing through the void. Major Torren Vask, an officer in Earth's unfunded military, stood in the command center watching the live footage of the massacre. The images flashed on the holoscreen, showing the Crixian war leader Drax sneering down at the burning ruins of the Yangtze Dawn. His voice, transmitted directly to Earth, mocked humanity's primitive weaponry. "Do you think your meager defenses can stop us?" War leader Drax's voice boomed, his words laced with contempt. "We are the Crixians, conquerors of worlds. You are nothing more than pests." For the first time in his career, Vask felt something stir inside him that he had never experienced before. A quiet, simmering anger. The Crixians were powerful, yes, but they were also grossly arrogant. Their faith in their technological superiority had blinded them to a crucial vulnerability. Vask's sharp eyes caught something in the data feeds. Their shields, which had seemed impenetrable, were a problem in themselves. He watched as the shields shimmered with a powerful glow, but there was a brief moment when they fluctuated. A glitch, perhaps? A flaw? Not invincible, just arrogant, Vask muttered to himself. The Crixian shields were designed to repel incoming attacks. Ballistic weapons, missiles, and conventional artillery were useless against them, but that wasn't what bothered Vask. What bothered him was the kinetic transfer. While the shields could block a projectile, they couldn't entirely negate the force of impact. The Crixians could stop a bullet, but the impact would still send their warriors stumbling back. The flaw was subtle, not immediately noticeable, but it was there. It was a flaw Vask knew he could exploit. As a strategist, Vask had spent years analyzing human combat history and tactics, training soldiers in methods that went beyond firepower. He was a Special Forces veteran with experience in Black Ops missions. Over the years, he had developed a particular expertise in understanding enemy strengths and weaknesses, how they thought, how they fought. And now, looking at the Crixians, he saw a glaring opportunity. Vask's mind raced. He didn't have the weapons to take down their shields directly. He didn't have a fleet nor the resources for a traditional assault. But he had an idea, one based not on raw firepower but on cunning and understanding physics. If he could exploit the kinetic transfer of the Crixian shields, he could create a weapon that would knock their warriors off balance, disrupt their formations, and make their invulnerability meaningless. He could turn their arrogance against them. He glanced at the other officers in the room, but none of them seemed to see what he saw. They were focused on the shields, the firepower, and the conventional methods of warfare. They were stuck in old thinking, hoping for a miracle weapon. But Vask knew better. He needed to act fast. He couldn't wait for bureaucratic approval. His fingers danced across the terminal, sending an encrypted message to his contacts within Earth's fragmented military channels. If the Crixians were truly as powerful as they thought, then their arrogance would be their undoing. As the Crixian warships began to deploy landing craft over Earth's cities, Vask's mind worked furiously. He had no illusions about the scale of the battle ahead. The Crixians had far superior technology and overwhelming numbers, but they were also overconfident, and that was a dangerous flaw. Vask knew that in war the first battle wasn't always won with weapons. It was won with intelligence. how you adapted to the changing situation, and how well you understood your enemy. The Crixians had underestimated humanity before. They thought Earth was just a weak, vulnerable planet with no way to defend itself. But Vask had a plan, and he was going to prove them wrong. The first step was to test his theory. He needed to see if his observations about the Crixian shields were correct. With the help of his Black Ops team, Vask would infiltrate one of their landing sites, gather data, and test his hypothesis. He couldn't afford to wait for approval. The Crixians were already on Earth's doorstep, and every second counted. But as Vask looked out over the ruined cities, the gravity of the situation hit him. This wasn't just about defeating an enemy. It was about survival. The Crixians had come to wipe out humanity, to take Earth for themselves, to turn it into another conquered world in their vast empire. And Earth had no choice but to fight back. No choice but to prove that despite all their technological superiority, the Crixians hadn't reckoned with one simple thing: the human spirit. As Vask began to assemble his plan, he felt the weight of history pressing down on him. He wasn't just fighting for survival, he was fighting for humanity's place in the galaxy. The Crixians had underestimated them. They thought humanity was weak, but they were about to learn that humans didn't give up easily, and when they fought back, they fought smarter, harder, and with everything they had. The first shots had been fired, but the real battle had just begun. Vask wasn't going to let Earth fall to the Crixian hegemony, not on his watch. The Crixian invasion was swift, brutal, and unrelenting. Earth's cities fell in rapid succession, their towering spires crumbling under the weight of Crixian forces. The Crixians, with their towering warships and shielded warriors, systematically occupied the planet, sweeping through the urban centers with terrifying efficiency. The civilian population, once sheltered under the illusion of safety, now faced the terrifying reality of an alien conqueror that saw them as nothing more than obstacles to their imperial conquest. Despite the overwhelming power of the Crixian forces, there was something they hadn't counted on. Humans did not give up easily. They fought back, not with the strength of their armies, but with the resilience of their ingenuity. The resistance wasn't born out of strength, but out of survival. And under the command of Major Torren Vask, it would take a form the Crixians would never expect. Vask, once a Black Ops specialist in Earth's military, knew that the key to fighting the Crixians lay not in brute force, but in exploiting their weaknesses. While their plasma lances could obliterate structures in seconds, and their energy shields rendered conventional weapons useless, Vask had noticed something crucial during the initial attacks. The Crixian shields, while impenetrable, had a critical flaw. They didn't absorb all the kinetic energy from impacts. The shields could block projectiles, yes, but the physical force of the impacts still affected the Crixian warriors, sending them stumbling back or off balance. It was this flaw that Vask saw as the key to humanity's fight. He wasn't going to use traditional weapons. Those had already failed. Instead, he turned to something far simpler and more effective: modified weapons and psychological warfare. Vask understood that if they could disrupt the Crixians' sense of invincibility, they could break their morale. Vask led a team of Black Ops operatives, each of whom had been handpicked for their ingenuity, stealth skills, and ability to think outside the box. They operated in the shadows, using their knowledge of human territory to navigate the devastated cities without being detected by the Crixians' sophisticated sensors. These were the first humans who fought not just for survival, but for a future they were willing to risk everything for. The weapons they used were far from conventional. Vask's team had retrofitted standard rifles with frangible rounds filled with a conductive gel. These rounds, upon impact, wouldn't penetrate the Crixian shields, but would splatter the conductive gel across their surfaces. The gel didn't harm the Crixians physically, but it disrupted their shields, forcing the warriors to wipe their visors clean and breaking the flow of their shields' energy. It was a simple tactic, but one that Vask knew would wear the Crixians down mentally. The Crixians, for all their technological superiority, were arrogant. They believed their shields made them invincible, and this arrogance was the Achilles heel that Vask and his team intended to exploit. As they used these modified weapons to strike at the Crixian patrols, the aliens' disciplined formations began to falter. The Crixians' once unshakable confidence began to crack as they were forced to constantly deal with the disruption of their shields. But this wasn't enough. Vask knew that to truly disrupt the Crixians, they had to think beyond just defeating patrols and breaking formations. They had to make the Crixians believe that the resistance was far stronger than it actually was. That's when Vask decided to implement his most dangerous and unconventional strategy. He ordered his team to get captured. The Crixians, still confident in their overwhelming superiority, began rounding up resistance fighters for executions. They viewed the human insurgents as nothing more than an inconvenience, a temporary nuisance to their grand conquest. The Crixians hoped that public executions would break the morale of the human resistance. What they didn't realize was that this plan was part of Vask's strategy all along. Vask's team deliberately allowed themselves to be captured by the Crixians, knowing full well that the aliens would take them prisoner. Once captured, they planted tracking devices on the Crixian officers, providing invaluable intelligence on the movement of their forces. The Crixians, in their arrogance, never thought that a captured human would be anything more than a bargaining chip, or an execution waiting to happen. Vask's plan was working, but it came at a cost. The executions were broadcast across the Crixian fleet, showing the world that Earth's resistance was futile. The public executions were meant to demoralize the human population, but they did the opposite. They hardened humanity's resolve. While the Crixians saw it as a sign of victory, the humans saw it as an act of defiance, a reminder that even in the face of certain death, they would not be broken. As the executions continued, Vask's team quietly gathered intelligence. They learned more about the Crixian structure, their tactics, and their command network. The resistance wasn't just surviving, it was growing stronger. The Crixians had underestimated humanity's ability to adapt. While they believed the resistance was weak and fragmented, it was, in fact, becoming more organized, more determined, and far more dangerous than the Crixians had ever imagined. With the information gathered from their captured comrades, Vask began to see the cracks in the Crixian strategy. They were too focused on their technology, too sure of their invincibility. They believed that the human spirit would break in the face of overwhelming power. But Vask knew that this would be their downfall. The Crixians had underestimated humans before, and they would do it again. The first phase of the war was coming to an end. The Crixians were still in control of the cities, but the resistance was stronger than ever. They had learned from their mistakes, adapted to the Crixian tactics, and most importantly, they had made the Crixians believe that they were winning. But the war was far from over. The next phase would require more than just simple tactics. It would require a bold new strategy, one that would shake the very foundation of the Crixian Empire, and Vask was ready to lead them. The Crixians had come to Earth thinking they could conquer it easily, but they had no idea what they were truly up against. The humans were not just fighting for survival, they were fighting for the future. And this fight, Vask knew, would only get more intense. The battle for Earth had just begun, and the Crixians were about to learn that humans were not as easy to conquer as they had believed. The war had raged on for weeks, and Earth's resistance, led by Commander Jax Vask, was beginning to show some results. The Crixian forces had underestimated humanity's adaptability, believing their advanced technology would quash any resistance swiftly. But the more the Crixians pressed, the more Vask and his team dug into their tactics, their technology, and their infrastructure. It was through this relentless pursuit that they uncovered the key to the Crixians' downfall, their communication system. Vask sat at a console in the makeshift command center, his eyes scanning the data streaming across the screen. The data had come from the tracking devices planted on Crixian officers during their staged capture. A risky operation that had cost them some good men, but the intelligence it yielded was invaluable. He had expected the usual: movement patterns, tactical shifts. But then something caught his eye. There was a consistent thread across the reports. Every Crixian commander's position was being tracked in real time. from their command ships to the very front lines of the conflict. It was a small but crucial detail, one that hinted at a larger system at play. Vask zoomed in on the signals. His hand hovered over the data stream as he pieced together the puzzle. The Crixian commanders were linked to their ships by quantum-entangled communication systems. The Crixians had built their entire strategy around these links, which provided instant, real-time updates on every commander's location and status. "They're broadcasting everything," Vask murmured to himself. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the data. The realization hit him like a thunderclap. The Crixians had built a communication system that was as much a strength as it was a weakness. If they were broadcasting their commanders' locations across the battlefield, that meant every major Crixian commander was a target. And that was something Vask could exploit. "Jix," he barked. His voice was hoarse with exhaustion, but the excitement of the discovery was unmistakable. The team's tech specialist, Jix, was hunched over a nearby station, his fingers dancing over the controls as he worked on a separate task. He looked up, his sharp eyes meeting Vask's. "What's up?" Jix asked, adjusting his headset. "Check this out," Vask said, pulling up the tracking data. "The Crixians are using quantum-entangled comms to track every commander. The whole damn fleet's linked to their position in real time. If we can hack into that, we can pinpoint their high-ranking officers anywhere in the galaxy." Jix leaned forward, his face illuminated by the glow of the screen. His brow furrowed as he analyzed the data. "Wait a second," he said, tapping a few commands. "You're saying the Crixians are broadcasting their officers' locations across the galaxy, every single one?" "Exactly," Vask said, his voice tinged with excitement. "All their command units, right there for the taking. We just have to find a way to listen in and target them." Jix grinned, the corner of his lips curling upward. "Now we're talking." He had been with Vask's team for years, an expert in unconventional warfare and technology, and he'd seen his fair share of impossible tasks. But this was different. This wasn't just hacking into enemy communications or decrypting a coded signal. This was turning the Crixians' entire system against them, using their own arrogance as the weapon. The first step, of course, was gaining access to their network. Jax began scouring the data, looking for a way in. The Crixians were notorious for their encrypted systems, but Jax wasn't fazed. If there was one thing he had learned during his years with the Resistance, it was that no system was unbreakable. Not when you had the right tools and the right mindset. "Okay, I've got something," Jax said, his fingers flying over the controls. "They use a central relay station for their quantum links. We can hijack that with some repurposed satellite arrays. I just need a little time to rewire the connection." Vask nodded, his mind already turning over the possibilities. "Do it. We can hit them fast, target the command ships and take them out. It'll create chaos in their ranks." Jix smirked. "This is going to be fun." It took them several days to assemble the necessary tech and make the modifications to the satellites. The Crixians had kept their comm systems tightly guarded, but Vask had learned long ago that the best weapons weren't always the most obvious ones. It wasn't about brute force. It was about precision, intelligence, and exploiting weaknesses. And now they had the tool to do just that. The team worked tirelessly, knowing that this could be their one shot at turning the tide of the war. They didn't have the firepower to match the Crixians in a direct confrontation, but they had something more valuable: information. And with the Crixians' command structure laid bare, it was only a matter of time before they struck. Once Jex had completed the hack, Vask's team launched their first test. They fed the signal from the hacked satellites into their systems and began tracking Crixian commanders across the galaxy. For the first time in the war, they had the upper hand. The Crixians' movements were no longer a mystery, they were an open book, ripe for the picking. "Here we go," Jix said, watching the data stream. "We've got them. Every single Crixian commander is now within reach." Vask looked over the data, a quiet smile forming on his face. He could feel the momentum shifting. This was the moment they'd been waiting for, the moment they turned the tide in their favor. They weren't just fighting against an enemy anymore. They were fighting to expose the cracks in their infrastructure, to break apart the Crixians' overconfidence. "We've got the Crixians on the run," Vask said, his voice calm and steady, yet filled with an intensity that matched the stakes. "Now let's show them what happens when they underestimate humanity." As they prepared for the next phase of their operation, the team knew that this breakthrough could change everything. The Crixians might have been technologically superior, but they had one fatal flaw. They couldn't anticipate human ingenuity. And that, Vask knew, would be their undoing. The hum of the command center was almost soothing to Commander Jax Vask. It wasn't the hum of success, not yet, but of calculated tension, the final moments before a storm. As he paced across the room, glancing at the data flowing across the screens, Vask could feel the weight of the plan settling into place. This wasn't just another raid or ambush. This was a decisive strike, the kind of move that could break the Crixian war machine once and for all. The plan was simple but audacious. Operation Quantum Strike. A plan to hijack the Crixian communication frequencies, exploiting their critical weakness, quantum-entangled command links, and hit them where it hurt the most. The Crixians had been relying on their sophisticated command network for far too long, and now it was time to take it apart. The Crixian fleet had always been a well-oiled machine. Every command unit was seamlessly connected to the others, with real-time data transmission linking them all. For them, this was a great advantage. For humanity, it was an opportunity. If they could disrupt those links, they could render the entire fleet blind, disorganized, and open to attack. It was a strategy that played into their strengths. Sneaky, precise, and devastatingly efficient. But the real challenge was timing. Vask had learned that the Crixians weren't just reactive, they were prideful. They thought they were unbeatable, especially with their dreadnoughts and impenetrable shields. They had proven themselves arrogant in their dismissal of humanity's ability to fight back, and this was exactly the kind of arrogance that would be their downfall. The first phase of the operation involved the Crixian Victory Parade. It was supposed to be a demonstration of their might, a show of force that would remind the galaxy why the Crixians had been at the top for so long. But for Vask and his team, it was the perfect cover. The Crixians would be focused on their own celebration, distracted by the sight of their victory over humanity. It would be the ideal time to strike. "Here's the plan," Vask said, his voice steady as he addressed his team in the cramped, dimly lit command center. "We'll use their arrogance against them. While they're too busy celebrating, we'll hack their comms and disable their fleet. We hit them hard and fast, no hesitation. Once we disrupt their command structure, we hit their ships where it counts. We make sure they can't react, can't regroup." The room was filled with the low murmur of agreement. Jix, the team's tech specialist, was already preparing the system for the breach. His fingers flew over the console, inputting complex codes that would allow them to hijack the Crixians' encrypted communication. "The quantum frequencies are locked tight," Jix muttered, a grin playing at the edge of his lips. "But they're not as unbreakable as they think. Just a matter of finding the right key. Give me a few minutes, Commander." Vask nodded and turned his attention to the rest of the team. He knew that the success of this operation hinged not just on their technological prowess, but also on their ability to move quickly, decisively. There would be no second chances. The countdown to the parade began, and with it the tension grew. The Crixian ships had gathered in formation, their hulls gleaming in the cold light of the distant stars. The celebration was already underway, a spectacle of power, and Vask could almost hear the smugness in the Crixians' voices as they reveled in their apparent superiority. But what they didn't know was that, at that very moment, the silent armada was closing in. Just 3 ships, disguised as low-priority civilian freighters, carrying nothing more than the power to strike a blow that would be felt across the galaxy. They didn't need to engage directly with the Crixian fleet. Just a few key strikes, and the whole thing would collapse. Vask stood at the center of the room, watching the data feed pour in. The Crixian ships were falling into place, their formation tightening as they prepared to take the stage in their parade. This was it, the moment he had been planning for, the moment that could make or break humanity's fight for survival. "Jix," Vask said, his voice steady but urgent. "How are we looking?" Jix didn't look up from his console, his fingers still flying over the keys. "Almost there. Just a few more tweaks, and we're in." Vask took a deep breath. It had taken months to get to this point. Months of preparation, deception, and covert operations. The Crixians had no idea what was coming. They would soon regret underestimating humanity. "Everyone, be ready," Vask said, his voice low. "Once we're in, we don't stop. We make our move, we disrupt their systems, and we hit them hard." As the parade continued in the background, Vask's team held their breath. The minutes ticked by, each one a test of their patience and resolve. They were about to strike, but there was a nagging feeling in the back of Vask's mind. The Crixians had been too confident. This was more than a military operation. It was a battle for respect. A battle to prove that humanity wasn't some weak race that could be crushed at will. Suddenly Jix let out a triumphant laugh. "Got it! We're in!" The entire room erupted into action. Vask didn't hesitate. He grabbed the comms mic and ordered his team into position. They had one shot and they couldn't afford to miss. As the Crixian ships continued their parade, celebrating their victory, the first phase of Operation Quantum Strike began. Vask's team, hidden in the shadows of the parade, activated their hack. The first few moments were quiet. The Crixian fleet didn't even realize what was happening. Their systems began to blink, then stutter. The real-time transmissions between command units started to break down. The shields of the dreadnoughts flickered, their once untouchable defense systems beginning to fail. "Maze 1 complete," Jix said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline that had to be surging through him. "They're blind." Vask's grin was sharp as he prepared to launch the next phase. This was just the beginning. The Crixians were about to learn that humanity had more than just strength in numbers. They had the ingenuity, the cunning, and the will to turn their own arrogance into their downfall. The Crixians had never seen anything like this. The once immovable war machine of the Crixian hegemony, an empire that had crushed 17 systems and laid waste to countless others, was finally being brought to its knees. It was a feeling that resonated with Major Jax Torron Vask more than anything else he had ever experienced. A battle-hardened strategist, Vask had always known how to play the long game. But this was something different. This was humanity's last stand, and it was about to turn the tide in their favor. Vask's plan had worked. The Crixian fleet had been successfully hacked, their communication systems hijacked, their once unassailable command structure now unraveling. The Crixian warlords, arrogantly confident in their superiority, were now finding themselves isolated, unable to coordinate, and disoriented in the chaos. For once, the tables had turned. As the Crixian fleet gathered for what they assumed would be a swift strike to annihilate Earth's resistance, they were blissfully unaware of the subtle yet deadly trap Vask had set. The Crixian dreadnoughts, some of the most fearsome ships in the galaxy, were now blind to their surroundings. Their shield systems, once impenetrable, faltered in the face of human ingenuity. The real-time communication that had kept their fleet in perfect synchronization was no longer functioning. They were vulnerable. The first phase of the plan had been to disrupt their communication systems, and Vask had succeeded beyond expectations. The Crixians' own arrogance had blinded them to the possibility that anyone could outthink them, let alone outfight them. The frequency hijacking had been the perfect opening. Now came the second phase, striking with precision. Vask knew that the key to victory lay in exploiting the Crixians' core weaknesses, their over-reliance on their technology and their blind spot to human adaptability. As he watched the Crixian fleet start to assemble for their assault on Earth, Vask knew it was time to bring the hammer down. "Phase 2, Vask murmured to himself, his voice almost a whisper in the chaos of the command room. Now we see if they can adapt. With a quick motion, he gave the order to launch the next wave. As the command fleet of Crixian ships powered up their engines and began to close in on Earth's remaining defenses, the human fleet, still small and outmatched, made their move. They weren't waiting to be annihilated. This time, they were going on the offensive. The Crixian flagship, the Dread Strike, was the first to feel the effects of the counterattack. The moment it powered its shields to full capacity, the human fleet's strategy came into play. The electromagnetic waves from the hijack frequencies reverberated through the system, locking onto the vulnerable spots in the Dread Strike's defenses. "Now," Vask whispered, a grim smile tugging at the corner of his lips. The feedback pulse hit. The Dread Strike's shields shuddered, flickered, and then collapsed, leaving the ship exposed. The human fleet's first salvo hit with devastating accuracy, breaching the Dread Strike's hull and knocking out its primary systems. The ship, once a symbol of Crixian dominance, was now crippled and helpless, drifting uncontrollably in space. But that was just the beginning. As the Dread Strike spiraled into chaos, the other Crixian ships began to realize something was wrong. Their commanders, scrambling to re-establish communication and control, found that their once-tight network of command had disintegrated. The once unified force was now in disarray. Ships that had once been synchronized in their movements were now aimlessly firing at one another, trying to compensate for the breakdown in their communications. But the humans didn't stop there. Vask's team had planned for this. The ships that had been prepared with the hijacked frequencies were now able to pinpoint weak spots in the Crixian fleet with ruthless precision. One by one, the dreadnoughts fell, each explosion a testament to humanity's ability to turn the tide of war, to turn the invincible into the vulnerable. Amidst the chaos, the Crixian war leader, Drax, stood aboard the Dread Strike, his personal ship, barking orders at his disoriented commanders. His pride, once so palpable and unshakable, had now begun to crack. "How are they doing this?" he shouted, the desperation in his voice unmistakable. "Regain control now!" But it was too late. The destruction was already underway. Vask had been waiting for this moment. The time had come for him to confront Drax personally. With his team in position, the order was given, and the final phase of the operation began. Vask's ship moved into position to board the Dread Strike, the heart of the Crixian fleet. As the boarding parties prepared to storm the flagship, Vask stood at the head of his team. He wasn't just the strategist anymore. He was the one who had led them through this impossible fight. The Crixians had thought they could crush humanity. They had thought that their technology made them unstoppable. Now, they would see what happened when humans were pushed to their limits. Vask's heart raced, not from fear, but from anticipation. This was his moment, the culmination of everything he had worked for. The Crixians would pay for underestimating Earth's ability to fight back. In the midst of the boarding operation, Vask finally came face to face with war leader Drax. The Crixian's imposing figure stood tall before him, his eyes burning with rage and disbelief. "You?" Drax growled. "You think you can defeat us? You're nothing but a speck of dust compared to the might of the Crixian hegemony." Vask didn't flinch. "You thought you were invincible," he said, his voice cold. "But you're just arrogant." The final blow came swiftly. Drax's personal shield failed as the result of the feedback pulse that had crippled the Dread Strike. Vask's unshielded pistol, a simple weapon, found its mark. As Drax crumpled to the floor, Vask looked down at the warlord's lifeless body and muttered, "Your mistake wasn't just underestimating us. It was thinking that better technology meant better warriors." The Crixian fleet had been decimated. The flagship lay in ruins, and the rest of the Crixian ships, now leaderless and disoriented, fled. Humanity had won. The Crixians had lost, not because they were outmatched in firepower, but because they had forgotten what it meant to be human, resourceful, adaptable, and relentless in the face of overwhelming odds. And as the human fleet secured victory, Vask couldn't help but reflect on how far they had come. They had done the impossible. They had proven that even the most formidable empire in the galaxy could fall, and humanity had been the one to bring them down. The victory was swift, but its aftermath was anything but simple. In the hours following the destruction of the Crixian flagship and the collapse of their command structure, the galaxy seemed to hold its breath. For the first time in centuries, the Crixian hegemony was not an unstoppable force, but a disjointed, fractured empire. The very foundation of their dominance had been shattered, and now the remaining warlords scrambled for control, unable to organize under the chaos that had been unleashed by the loss of their leadership. The Crixian fleet, once a symbol of fear across the galaxy, now lay in ruins, drifting aimlessly through the vast emptiness of space. The survivors of the Crixian military, stripped of their commanders and without their meticulously organized systems, were reduced to little more than a rabble of ships. In many ways, the Crixians had become their own worst enemy. The arrogance that had once made them so dangerous now worked against them as they failed to adapt to the speed and precision of human tactics. On the ground, the effects of their defeat were just as profound. The Crixian occupation had been brutal, their rule marked by fear, repression, and systemic control over countless worlds. The power vacuum left by the collapse of their military structure caused a ripple effect across their empire. The populations of the Crixian-controlled systems, long oppressed, were quick to rise up. Rebel factions, once cowering under the weight of Crixian domination, now found the courage to strike back. Planets that had once been silent under the heavy boots of Crixian soldiers erupted in rebellion. Vask watched as news of these uprisings spread across the comm channels. For the first time, he saw hope where there had been only submission. The Crixian warlords, their once imposing fleets now scattered and leaderless, were unable to maintain control. Each day brought more reports of resistance as former slaves and soldiers alike took up arms. It was a chaotic, frenzied time, but it was also one of unprecedented opportunity for those who had long suffered under the Crixians' boot. Earth, for all its scars, was now in the position of power. The planet that had once been seen as a speck in the galaxy's sprawling conflicts was now a beacon of hope. Earth's role had shifted from desperate survival to active peacekeeping. Though the Crixians' empire was collapsing, the consequences of that collapse were far-reaching. Entire sectors of space were destabilizing. The unrest among Crixian-controlled systems had the potential to spiral into total chaos, threatening to plunge the galaxy into further war. It was here that Earth found its new mission: maintaining stability, fostering peace, and ensuring that the power vacuum left by the Crixians didn't become a breeding ground for even more dangerous forces. Earth's fleet, bolstered by its victories and the knowledge gained from its confrontation with the Crixians, was tasked with maintaining order among the galactic systems, helping rebuild and ensuring that no new threats could rise from the ashes of the old empire. As Earth's diplomats and commanders coordinated efforts to stabilize the galaxy, Vask found himself in a strange position. He had won the war, he had led humanity through the impossible against overwhelming odds, and had become a hero in the eyes of countless civilians. But the price of victory weighed heavily on him. The political instability caused by the collapse of the Crixian Empire made his position tenuous. Every faction, every group of rebels, every former enemy wanted something from Earth. And with every new alliance forged, every new agreement reached, the pressure grew. Vask had led humanity to victory, but what came after? What would his legacy be in the face of such a vast, uncertain future? The war had cost him more than just physical scars. He had seen things, too many faces, too many bodies, that had left their mark on him in ways he couldn't fully process. He had always known war was brutal, but the cold indifference of the Crixians to human life, the way they had treated his people, had changed him. And now, with the Crixian warlords scrambling to maintain control, Vask had to grapple with the knowledge that the fight wasn't truly over. The rise of rebellion in the Crixian Empire would eventually force Earth to decide whether to intervene further or leave the galaxy to sort itself out. Vask's thoughts were interrupted as he looked out across the new, sprawling military command center. The silent armada, now a powerful force, stood at the ready, its fleet fully equipped and prepared to respond to any new threat that might arise. Despite the victories, despite the world-changing progress they had made, Earth remained in a delicate position. The Council still looked on, hesitant and wary of Earth's growing influence, unsure of how to handle this new galactic power that had emerged from the shadows of conflict. The rebellion on Crixian worlds was still in full swing, and the pirate factions that had once raided Earth's colonies now presented a different problem. They were no longer simply enemies to be fought. They were potential allies to be wooed. There was no shortage of new problems, and Vask knew that humanity's growing influence would bring both new opportunities and new enemies. Standing alone, Vask finally allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. As he ran his fingers over the wristband that held the Yangtze Dawn ID tag, a reminder of the losses, the lives, the families, he realized that the galaxy had irrevocably changed. Earth had won. The Crixians had fallen, but the galaxy was still a dangerous, unpredictable place. The future of Earth, of humanity, now rested in the hands of leaders like him, and he knew better than anyone that with power came responsibility. He had seen firsthand the consequences of unchecked power. The Crixian hegemony had shown them all how dangerous it could be to think yourself invincible. Earth could never fall into that trap. As he prepared for the next steps, Vask understood that his role had changed. He wasn't just a soldier anymore. He was a symbol of humanity's will to survive, to adapt and to thrive. And though he had won a war, the real fight was just beginning. "Shigi, let them try to outsmart us," Vask muttered to himself. "We've only just begun." Earth had survived. But the road ahead was long, and Vask was ready to lead humanity forward, no matter the cost. The dust of war was still settling across the galaxy. The Crixian hegemony had crumbled, their once unstoppable fleet scattered in ruins, and their iron grip on conquered worlds slipping away. But for Earth, the true battle was just beginning. As the first signs of victory flickered across the battlefield, humanity faced the daunting task of rebuilding. It wasn't just about restoring what had been lost. It was about crafting a new future, one where Earth was no longer the underdog in a galaxy dominated by ruthless empires. With the remnants of the Crixian forces in disarray, Earth's command was tasked with ensuring the galaxy didn't descend into further chaos. In the heart of Earth's new military command center, the silent hum of machinery was a constant reminder of the work ahead. Engineers and technicians worked around the clock, retrofitting Earth's fleets with the salvage technology left behind by the Crixians. Their once impenetrable shields were now Earth's greatest asset, reverse-engineered and adapted for human use. The railguns that had once been used by the Crixians to obliterate planets were now remade into humanity's most formidable weapons, and even the Crixian battle tactics, though brutally efficient, were now analyzed for their flaws, to ensure that Earth would never fall into the same trap of arrogance. Commander Vask, who had led humanity through the most dangerous conflict of their existence, stood at the center of it all, his hands tied between military leadership and diplomatic maneuvering. He had won the war, but as Earth's forces rebuilt, tensions simmered within the corridors of power. It wasn't just the threat of remaining Crixian warlords or the pirates who had once raided Earth's colonies that posed the greatest danger. It was the internal strife that threatened to undo all that humanity had achieved. Vask watched as politicians, diplomats and military officers vied for control, each one eager to claim a piece of the newfound power that Earth now wielded. The once fractured human factions, unified under the threat of the Crixians, were now fractured once more, each group pulling in different directions. Military leaders fought for dominance, diplomatic efforts struggled to find common ground, and the growing power of Earth's fleet was met with equal parts fear and admiration. The galaxy had taken notice of Earth's newfound strength, but not all were thrilled by it. The Zarathi, once loyal allies of the Crixians, had begun to shift their allegiance, seeing Earth as a viable power capable of challenging the remnants of the Dominion. The Zarathi defectors, many of whom had grown disillusioned with the Crixians' failed empire, now offered their support in exchange for protection and a place at the table. Pirates, once Earth's sworn enemies, now sought to strike deals with humanity, seeing the value in aligning with a rising power rather than remaining on the fringes of galactic lawlessness. But as new alliances were forged, the cracks in humanity's own unity became more apparent. The struggle for influence over these new alliances was fierce. Some factions viewed the Zarathi defectors as potential allies, while others saw them as dangerous threats. The pirates, once a scourge to Earth's colonies, were now being courted for their military expertise and knowledge of the galaxy's darker corners. But even the most hardened leaders knew they couldn't trust such a volatile group. The diplomatic wheels turned slowly as leaders tried to balance the security of Earth with the growing political chaos surrounding them. The galaxy's shifting balance of power was mirrored within Earth itself. Vask found himself constantly at odds with the political establishment, who sought to capitalize on the victory while also consolidating their own power. As Earth's most famous military leader, he was in high demand, but his focus had always been on survival, not on the intricacies of galactic politics. Yet now, he was forced into the role of a reluctant diplomat, attending negotiations and working with the newly formed alliances to ensure that Earth's voice was heard on the galactic stage. As Earth's fleet grew in size and strength, so too did the responsibility that Vask carried. His military strategies had earned him the trust of his soldiers, but now, with the galaxy's future in the balance, Vask was faced with questions that were not as easily answered as battlefield tactics. How would Earth manage the complex web of new alliances and enemies? Could humanity truly maintain peace in a galaxy filled with factions that had known nothing but war for centuries? And, perhaps most importantly, could Earth hold on to its newfound power without repeating the mistakes of the Crixian hegemony, arrogance, oppression, and the belief that their dominance was inevitable? For Vask, the road ahead was unclear. As he sat in the command center, looking at the vast map of the galaxy spread before him, he couldn't help but feel the weight of the decisions that would come. Earth had emerged from the ashes of war, but the future of humanity was far from secure. The Silent Armada, once a symbol of humanity's desperation, had now become a beacon of strength. It was a tool that could enforce peace, or one that could become just another weapon of oppression if not carefully wielded. Vask knew that his actions, his leadership, and his decisions would shape the galaxy's future. The Crixians had fallen, but the true battle for Earth's place in the stars had only just begun. As Vask prepared for another round of negotiations, he couldn't shake the feeling that the peace they had fought so hard to achieve was fragile. Earth's rise had been swift, but the road to maintaining that power would be fraught with challenges. And Vask, though weary, knew he couldn't afford to let his guard down. The galaxy had underestimated humanity before, and now that they had the upper hand, it was clear that not everyone was happy to see Earth rise. Vask's thoughts were interrupted by a voice across the comms. "Commander Vask, the negotiations are ready. The Zarathi are waiting for your response." He stood, taking one last look at the stars beyond the windows of the command center. "Prepare to meet with them," he said, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "Let's see if we can avoid any more wars." As the door slid open and Vask moved towards the briefing room, he couldn't shake the thought that peace, like victory, was always temporary. Earth had won its place in the galaxy, but now it was time to ensure that it stayed there. Humanity had taken its first steps into a new era of power. The question was, how would it walk the path ahead? The future of Earth and of the galaxy rested on that answer. The Crixian hegemony was no more. Its vast fleet, once a terrifying symbol of power, lay in ruins, scattered across the galaxy like forgotten debris. Its oppressive rule had crumbled, and in its place, Earth had emerged. As an unchallenged power, its role in galactic politics now firmly established. Admiral Torren Vask stood on the bridge of the flagship, looking out into the black expanse of space. The stars seemed different now, brighter, almost as if they too recognized the shift in the balance of power. Where once humanity had been dismissed, now Earth was a force to be reckoned with. The galaxy had seen the fall of the Crixians and had watched as humanity, with cunning and sheer will, turned the tables on a seemingly unbeatable enemy. No longer the underdog, Earth had solidified its position among the stars. The success of the Silent Armada, built from salvaged technology and unconventional warfare, had turned Earth into a galactic power. But it hadn't been easy. The Crixian warlords had been defeated, but the galaxy wasn't without its new challenges. Other factions watched Earth closely now, wary of its newfound strength. The question of whether humanity could maintain its dominance loomed large, but there was no denying that Earth had earned its place. Basque's legacy was now etched in the history of the galaxy. He had been more than just a strategist. He was the symbol of humanity's refusal to bow to the powers that had once dismissed them. His leadership, his ability to outthink and outmaneuver the Crixian hegemony, had led Earth to victory. His tactical brilliance had been the key to Earth's survival, and it had ensured that humanity's rise was swift and undeniable. Yet, as Vasque stood there watching the stars, he couldn't shake the weight of what had been sacrificed. The war had cost many lives, and the consequences of humanity's victory were far-reaching. There were still Crixian warlords scattered across the galaxy, still worlds under occupation, and still the lingering question of whether Earth could live up to the expectations it had set for itself. Vasque had won the war, but peace, it seemed, was just another battle. The galaxy was not a place where power stayed fixed for long. Humanity would have to work tirelessly to ensure its place. The political landscape was shifting, but the old power structures had not been entirely undone. The Federation, still hesitant to fully embrace Earth's rise, would be a tricky partner to navigate. And there were still those in the galaxy who saw Earth's ascent with jealousy, some even planning to topple the new power. But for now, Earth's victory was undeniable. Vasque had proven that humanity was capable of so much more than anyone had thought possible. The Silent Armada, once a symbol of desperation, had become a beacon of strength, capable of enforcing peace across the galaxy. And it was not just Earth's military that had grown in power. It was its voice in the Galactic Council, its influence over the political and economic systems that had once ignored them. As Vasque sat in the command chair, his thoughts drifted to the future. The next challenge was already on the horizon. The Crixians were gone, but new threats would emerge. There were still pirates to deal with, other factions to subdue, and old alliances to navigate. Vasque knew that the road ahead would not be easy. But he was no stranger to challenges. Earth had overcome the impossible before, and now, with their place in the galaxy secured, it was time to show the universe just what humanity could do. He turned to his officers, his gaze steady and resolute. "We've earned our place," he said, his voice low but confident. "Now we make sure we keep it." The crew nodded, knowing what that meant. Earth had fought for survival, but now it had to fight for its future. No longer the underdog, humanity was poised to shape the future of the galaxy. The battles would continue, but this time, humanity would be the one setting the terms. Vasque looked out at the stars once more, a slight smirk on his face. The galaxy had underestimated humanity before. Now they would remember that mistake. "Let's see what comes next," Vasque muttered to himself, as the Silent Armada set its course for new frontiers. Humanity was no longer the prey. They were the hunters now, and they would not be overlooked again. The future of the galaxy would be shaped by their hands. The stars stretched out before him, a vast and uncertain frontier. But Earth was ready. And so was Torin Vasque. What do you think humanity's next move should be in this new galaxy order? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button for more thrilling HFY stories.